On the early morning of October 28, 1988, a peaceful residential street in Perdizes, one of São Paulo's most affluent neighborhoods, became the scene of an unthinkable tragedy. Inside a luxurious home on Rua Maceió, two respected professionals, Manfred Albert von Richthofen and Marísia von Richthofen, were found brutally murdered in their own beds. Manfred was a well-known dentist with a thriving practice and a reputation for being strict but fair. Marísia was his wife, a woman admired for her elegance, intelligence, and devotion to her family. Together, they lived what many would describe as a privileged life, raising 3 children in comfort and stability. Their daughter Suzane, then just 15 years old, was the youngest of the siblings. Described by some as intelligent and charismatic, she had begun to show signs of rebellion during her teenage years, clashing frequently with her parents over rules, curfews, and expectations. On that fateful night, neighbors reported hearing nothing unusual. No screams, no alarms, no sounds of struggle. Yet inside that quiet house, something violent had unfolded. When emergency services arrived after concerned calls from friends and relatives, they discovered a crime scene soaked in blood and chaos. Both Manfred and Marísia had been stabbed multiple times. There were clear signs of a desperate attempt to defend themselves. Overturned furniture, broken glass, and blood spatter across the walls and floor. Despite their efforts, neither survived the attack. At first glance, police considered the possibility of a robbery gone wrong. After all, the house was located in a wealthy area, and such crimes weren't unheard of. However, nothing appeared to have been stolen. Expensive jewelry, electronics, even cash left untouched in drawers. This detail raised immediate suspicion that this was not a random act of violence. Suzane, who was not present at the time of the murders, became the focal point of the investigation almost immediately. She returned home later that morning, reportedly calm and unemotional, which struck investigators as odd given the circumstances. Her behavior in the days that followed only deepened concerns. As detectives dug deeper into Suzane's recent past, they uncovered a troubling pattern. She had become increasingly distant from her parents, especially her father, whom she described as authoritarian and overly controlling. According to testimonies from friends and schoolmates, Suzane often spoke about wanting freedom and independence, and how she felt trapped by her family's expectations. Around the same time, Suzane had started dating Daniel Cravinhos, a young man from a lower socio-economic background. Their relationship was met with resistance from her parents, who disapproved of his lifestyle and influence on their daughter. This tension seemed to fuel Suzane's growing resentment toward her family. Further investigation revealed that Suzane had spent time with Daniel and his younger brother, Christian, on the night of the murders. Surveillance footage and phone records placed them together around the estimated time of death. These findings led authorities to believe that the trio may have planned the crime together. According to statements made later during the trial, Suzane allegedly encouraged Daniel and Christian to commit the murders, promising them money and freedom in return. She supposedly told them that her parents kept large sums of cash at home, and that once they were out of the way, she could take control of the inheritance. What began as a romantic conflict between a teenager and her parents quickly escalated into a cold-blooded plan to eliminate those closest to her. The idea wasn't just reckless. It was calculated, manipulative, and deeply disturbing. The case sent shockwaves through Brazilian society, challenging perceptions about wealth, privilege, and youth violence. It forced people to confront the uncomfortable reality that evil doesn't always come from the outside. Sometimes, it grows quietly within the walls of a home. As news of the crime spread, media outlets flooded with coverage. Headlines painted Suzane as a heartless girl who betrayed her own blood for love and money. Others debated whether she was truly capable of orchestrating such a crime at such a young age. The Richthofen case would soon become one of the most infamous in Brazilian history. A chilling tale of manipulation, betrayal, and murder. In the days following the discovery of the bodies, Brazilian authorities launched an immediate and extensive investigation into the murders, treating it as a high-priority case due to both the brutality of the crime and the social status of the victims, members of São Paulo's elite. Forensic teams arrived at the scene early in the morning of October 28, 1988, meticulously documenting every detail of the house, collecting fingerprints, blood samples, fibers, and any other physical evidence that could lead to the identification of the perpetrators. Initial autopsies conducted later that day confirmed that Manfred and Marísia had died between 1 a.m. and 4 a.m., with cause of death attributed to multiple stab wounds and blunt force trauma, indicating a violent and prolonged attack. Despite the chaos inside the house, investigators noted that nothing appeared to have been stolen. Expensive watches, jewelry, and even cash left in plain sight were untouched, leading them to rule out robbery as the primary motive. Suzane von Richthofen, who was not present during the murders, became the first person of interest. She returned home the following morning, appearing unusually calm and composed for someone who had just lost both parents in such horrific circumstances. Her behavior raised concerns among the detectives. She did not cry, show signs of distress, or express shock. Instead, she answered questions in a detached manner, often hesitating before responding or offering vague explanations about her whereabouts during the night of the crime. When asked where she had spent the night, Suzane claimed to have stayed at a friend's house. But when pressed for details, she struggled to provide consistent information about what time she arrived, what they ate, and whether anyone else was present. Detectives quickly cross-referenced her story with phone records and surveillance footage from nearby locations, discovering that Suzane had actually been seen with Daniel Cravinhos earlier that evening, contradicting her alibi and deepening suspicions. Further analysis revealed that Suzane had visited her family's home earlier on October 28, around 9 p.m., under the pretense of picking up some personal belongings. This visit lasted only a few minutes, but it placed her directly at the scene hours before the murders occurred. Meanwhile, Daniel and Christian Cravinhos were also being tracked by police, who discovered that they had made several suspicious phone calls in the days following the crime and had attempted to access one of Suzane's bank accounts without proper authorization. As more inconsistencies emerged, law enforcement began building a timeline that painted Suzane not as an innocent bystander, but as someone who may have played a central role in planning the attack, possibly even orchestrating it from the beginning. One of the most crucial pieces of evidence came from a pair of gloves found near the master bedroom. Forensic experts were able to match DNA traces on them to Daniel Cravinhos, linking him directly to the crime scene and raising further questions about his involvement. The media caught wind of these developments quickly, and soon the story exploded across national headlines, transforming what had initially been a tragic murder case into a full-blown scandal involving class conflict, forbidden love, and teenage rebellion gone horribly wrong. Public opinion turned sharply against Suzane and the Cravinhos brothers, fueled by reports of their alleged callousness, financial motives, and lack of remorse. Many Brazilians saw the crime as a shocking betrayal of trust within a seemingly stable and loving family. With mounting pressure from both the public and the press, investigators intensified their efforts, preparing to bring the suspects in for questioning, a move that would soon lead to dramatic confessions and the unraveling of a deeply disturbing plot. Within days of the murders, Brazilian authorities gathered enough compelling evidence to issue arrest warrants for Suzane von Richthofen, Daniel Cravinhos, and Christian Cravinhos, officially labeling them as suspects in the double homicide of Manfred and Marísia von Richthofen. The arrests took place swiftly. All three were detained by police within a week of the crime, with Suzane being taken into custody from her school while Daniel and Christian were arrested at their home in a working-class neighborhood of São Paulo. During the initial interrogations, Suzane maintained her innocence, claiming that she had no knowledge of the murders and had merely been visiting friends on the night of October 28, 2008. However, her version of events contained numerous inconsistencies that investigators quickly picked apart. Daniel, under intense pressure and facing overwhelming forensic evidence, including the gloves found at the scene and his own DNA traces inside the house, eventually broke down and confessed to participating in the crime, though he insisted that he had not intended to kill either of the victims. According to Daniel's confession, he and Christian had entered the house armed with knives, intending to scare the couple so that Suzane could gain control over her inheritance and be free to live with him without interference from her parents. However, things escalated rapidly once Manfred and Marísia resisted the intrusion. Christian corroborated parts of Daniel's testimony, admitting that he had accompanied his brother into the house but claiming that he had acted out of fear and coercion rather than willingness. He described how Suzane had repeatedly pressured Daniel to take action and had promised them money and a new life if they followed through. Suzane continued to deny direct involvement in the killings, maintaining that she had never instructed anyone to commit violence against her parents. Nevertheless, prosecutors argued that her actions and words in the months leading up to the crime constituted premeditation and instigation. Phone records presented during the investigation showed frequent communication between Suzane and Daniel in the weeks before the murders, including discussions about finances, inheritance, and ways to get rid of her parents' influence. These conversations were interpreted by the court as clear indicators of intent. Financial documents also played a key role in the prosecution's case. It was revealed that Suzane had recently begun transferring large sums of money from her parents' accounts to private savings, suggesting that she had already begun planning for life after their deaths. The emotional toll of the investigation weighed heavily on all involved. Daniel reportedly suffered panic attacks and breakdowns during interrogation, while Christian, being the youngest, expressed visible remorse and regret for his role in the tragedy. Suzane, however, remained emotionally distant throughout the process, showing little reaction to the unfolding revelations. As the investigation progressed, it became increasingly clear that this was not a spontaneous act of violence, but a carefully planned operation carried out by individuals who believed they could manipulate fate and escape justice. The case shocked Brazil and became a symbol of how privilege, manipulation, and obsession can lead to unimaginable consequences. It also sparked debates about juvenile responsibility, moral development, and the psychological effects of toxic relationships on young minds. With all three suspects now behind bars and having provided detailed confessions, the focus shifted to preparing for trial, a legal proceeding that would draw national attention and become one of the most talked about criminal cases in Brazilian history. In the coming weeks, the media would continue to dissect every aspect of the investigation, fueling public fascination and outrage. Documentaries, news segments, and magazine covers would ensure that the Richthofen case remained in the spotlight long after the initial horror faded. The trial of Suzane von Richthofen, Daniel Cravinhos, and Christian Cravinhos began in 1992, nearly 4 years after the murders, reflecting the slow-moving nature of Brazil's judicial system and the complexity of gathering and presenting evidence in such a high-profile case. From the very start, the courtroom became a battleground of narratives. Prosecutors portrayed Suzane as the manipulative mastermind who used her intelligence and charm to orchestrate the deaths of her own parents, while her defense team argued that she was a confused teenager caught in a web of bad influences and poor decisions. The prosecution built its case around the idea that Suzane had planned the murders for months, using her relationship with Daniel to manipulate him into committing the crime. They presented a detailed timeline supported by phone records, financial transactions, and witness testimonies to prove their point. Prosecutors emphasized Suzane's emotional detachment, highlighting her unusual calmness during the discovery of the bodies and her lack of grief in the days that followed. Behaviors, they argued, were inconsistent with those of an innocent person. Daniel and Christian were portrayed as the actual perpetrators of the crime, the ones who physically carried out the attack, though Daniel was depicted as the more dominant figure, while Christian was cast as a frightened accomplice who had been coerced by his older brother and Suzane. Suzane's defense team attempted to shift blame onto Daniel, arguing that he had taken advantage of her youth and naivety to gain access to her family's wealth. They claimed that she had never explicitly ordered him to commit violence and had only discussed hypothetical scenarios of escaping parental control. However, prosecutors countered this argument by presenting recorded conversations and written messages in which Suzane allegedly encouraged Daniel to take care of her parents and remove them from her life permanently, statements that strongly suggested intent and premeditation. Throughout the trial, Suzane remained largely silent, rarely reacting to the accusations or showing emotion, a demeanor that many observers interpreted as coldness or indifference, reinforcing the image of a calculating individual who felt no remorse for her actions. The jury listened to graphic descriptions of the murders, including autopsy reports that detailed the extent of the injuries inflicted upon Manfred and Marísia, as well as photos of the crime scene that left many in the courtroom visibly shaken. After years of delays, hearings, and appeals, the trial finally reached its conclusion in 2002, almost 14 years after the original crime, delivering a verdict that would define the futures of Suzane, Daniel, and Christian for decades to come. All three defendants were found guilty: Suzane for instigation and conspiracy, Daniel for execution, and Christian for participation in the crime, marking the end of a long and emotionally draining legal process that had captivated the entire nation. The sentences handed down reflected the severity of the crime. Suzane received 39 years and 6 months in prison. Daniel was sentenced to 40 years and 6 months, and Christian, due to his age and lesser involvement, was given 25 years in a juvenile facility. The decision was met with mixed reactions. Some praised the court for delivering justice, while others criticized the leniency of the sentences given the brutal nature of the crime. Debates erupted across Brazil about the effectiveness of the penal system and whether minors should ever be tried as adults in extreme cases. The trial itself became a cultural milestone, inspiring countless discussions about morality, justice, and the blurred lines between guilt and influence in complex crimes involving teenagers. With the legal chapter closed, the focus now turned to the long road of imprisonment and rehabilitation, a journey that would test each of the convicts in different ways and shape the rest of their lives. On April 10, 2002, the judge delivered the final sentences in the Richthofen case, bringing a formal conclusion to a trial that had spanned over a decade and captured the attention of the entire country. Suzane von Richthofen was sentenced to 39 years and 6 months in prison for instigating and conspiring in the murders of her parents, a punishment that reflected the court's belief that she had played a central role in planning the crime despite not being physically present during the attack. Daniel Cravinhos, the main executor of the murders, received a slightly harsher sentence of 40 years and 6 months, acknowledging his direct involvement in the violence that led to the deaths of Manfred and Marísia. Christian Cravinhos, the youngest of the three and considered the least responsible due to his age and level of participation, was sentenced to 25 years in a juvenile correctional facility, a decision that sparked debate about the fairness of sentencing minors in serious crimes. When the verdict was read aloud in court, Suzane remained expressionless, offering no sign of regret or remorse, a reaction that many in the courtroom interpreted as confirmation of her guilt and lack of empathy. Daniel, overwhelmed by the weight of the sentence and the reality of what he had done, reportedly broke down in tears, visibly shaken by the enormity of his punishment and the irreversible damage he had caused. Christian, still a minor at the time of sentencing, sat quietly, his face betraying a mix of fear and confusion as he absorbed the fact that he would spend a significant portion of his life behind bars. The sentences ignited widespread discussion across Brazil, with many people questioning whether justice had truly been served. Some argued that the punishments were too light given the brutality of the crime, while others believed they were appropriate considering the ages and backgrounds of the defendants. The case reignited a national conversation about the treatment of juvenile offenders in Brazil, with critics calling for reforms to the legal system that would allow for harsher penalties in cases involving severe crimes committed by minors. Media outlets covered the sentencing extensively, broadcasting interviews with legal experts, psychologists, and members of the public, each offering their perspectives on the implications of the case for future criminal trials. Some analysts pointed out that the Richthofen case had set a precedent in Brazilian jurisprudence, influencing how courts would approach similar crimes involving young people in positions of power or manipulation. Meanwhile, Suzane, Daniel, and Christian were transferred to separate correctional facilities, where they would begin serving their sentences, each facing a unique path of isolation, reflection, and potential rehabilitation. Over time, their names would become synonymous with betrayal, greed, and tragedy, a grim legacy that would follow them wherever they went, both inside and outside of prison walls. The memory of Manfred and Marísia von Richthofen would remain alive in the hearts of those who knew them and in the collective consciousness of a nation that had watched their story unfold like a real-life horror film. After receiving her sentence in 2002, Suzane von Richthofen was transferred to a women's prison in São Paulo, where she began serving her 39-year term in a maximum security facility designed to hold some of the country's most notorious female criminals. From the outset, Suzane adopted a calculated and reserved demeanor, keeping to herself and avoiding unnecessary interactions with fellow inmates, a strategy that helped her navigate the dangerous dynamics of prison life while maintaining a certain level of control over her environment. Over time, She earned a reputation as an intelligent and manipulative figure. Some inmates admired her ability to think strategically and maintain composure under pressure, while others feared her presence, believing she was capable of exploiting situations to her advantage. Despite the harsh conditions of incarceration, Suzane managed to pursue higher education while in prison, earning degrees in psychology and law through correspondence courses and university partnerships with correctional institutions, a feat that surprised many and demonstrated her resilience and ambition. Daniel Cravinhos, meanwhile, was sent to a male prison far from his hometown, where he faced the daunting reality of serving a 40-year sentence for a crime that had consumed his identity and defined his existence. Initially, Daniel struggled with feelings of guilt and depression, attempting suicide twice during his early years in prison as he grappled with the consequences of his actions and the loss of freedom. However, over time, he began to seek redemption through rehabilitation programs, volunteering in outreach initiatives aimed at preventing youth violence and helping other inmates confront the root causes of their criminal behavior. Christian Cravinhos, the youngest of the trio, was placed in a juvenile detention center until he reached adulthood, where he underwent psychological therapy and educational programs designed to help him reintegrate into society. Unlike his brother, Christian openly expressed remorse for his role in the crime, acknowledging that he had been easily influenced by Daniel and Suzane and had failed to stand up for what was right when it mattered most. Upon reaching adulthood, Christian was transferred to an adult prison, where he continued his efforts to rebuild his life, focusing on personal growth, mental health, and self-improvement rather than dwelling on the past. While Suzane remained emotionally detached from both brothers, Daniel grew resentful of Christian, blaming him for not intervening during the attack and allowing things to spiral out of control. Meanwhile, Suzane distanced herself from both men, preferring to focus on her intellectual pursuits and personal reinvention, a transformation that fascinated journalists and scholars alike, who debated whether she had genuinely changed or was simply adapting to her circumstances. Media coverage of their prison lives remained steady over the years, with occasional updates on their progress, setbacks, and evolving personas, a testament to the enduring public fascination with the Richthofen case. As the years passed, the story of Suzane, Daniel, and Christian became more than just a crime saga. It evolved into a complex narrative of human behavior, accountability, and the possibility of change, even in the darkest of circumstances. As we move closer to the final chapters of this story, we will examine how the Richthofen case influenced Brazilian pop culture, inspiring films, series, documentaries, and books that continue to revisit the story for new generations. The Richthofen case did more than shock the nation. It exposed deep fractures in Brazilian society related to class, gender, justice, and the perception of youth violence, sparking conversations that extended far beyond the courtroom and into everyday life. Many Brazilians were initially stunned that someone from a privileged background, a teenager with access to education, wealth, and stability, could commit such a heinous crime, challenging long-held assumptions about poverty being the primary driver of criminal behavior. The case forced a national reckoning with the idea that wealth and opportunity do not necessarily prevent individuals from engaging in destructive or violent acts, and that psychological factors such as manipulation, control, and emotional neglect can be just as dangerous as socioeconomic hardship. Experts in psychology and criminology used the Richthofen case as a reference point in discussions about adolescent development, pointing out that Suzane's age at the time of the crime, 15, raised important ethical and legal questions about juvenile culpability and the possibility of rehabilitation. Some argued that Suzane's upbringing played a crucial role in shaping her behavior. Despite her material comfort, she reportedly felt emotionally neglected by her parents, especially her father, whose strictness and high expectations may have contributed to her resentment and eventual rebellion. Others pointed to the influence of her relationship with Daniel Cravinhos as a catalyst for the crime, highlighting how romantic entanglements can sometimes lead young people to make decisions that are irrational, impulsive, and tragically irreversible. The media coverage surrounding the case also revealed biases in how female criminals are perceived. While male offenders are often depicted as inherently dangerous, Suzane was frequently portrayed as manipulative, seductive, and cold, reinforcing gendered stereotypes about women who commit crimes outside traditional roles. This framing led to heated debates about whether Suzane was truly a monster or simply a deeply troubled individual who lacked proper guidance and mental health support, with some commentators arguing that her sentence was disproportionately harsh given her age and psychological profile. The judicial system's handling of the case also became a topic of intense scrutiny, particularly due to the lengthy delays in the trial and sentencing, which many saw as emblematic of Brazil's bureaucratic inefficiencies and lack of timely justice. Critics of the legal process argued that the slow-moving nature of the trial allowed the suspects to avoid immediate accountability, and that the eventual sentences failed to reflect the full gravity of the crime, especially considering the brutal manner in which the victims were killed. At the same time, others defended the court's decision, emphasizing that the sentences were among the longest ever handed down in Brazil for crimes committed by minors, and that the case set an important precedent for future cases involving juvenile offenders. Over the years, the Richthofen case has been cited in academic papers, law school lectures, and psychology textbooks as a complex example of how multiple factors, including family dynamics, social environment, peer pressure, and personality traits, can converge to create a perfect storm of criminal behavior. Schools and universities have incorporated the case into discussions on ethics, morality, and forensic psychology, using it to illustrate the importance of early intervention, open communication, and emotional support in preventing similar tragedies. The ongoing fascination with the Richthofen case speaks volumes about its impact. It is not merely remembered because of the horror of the crime, but because it represents a moment when society was forced to look inward and ask difficult questions about justice, privilege, and the limits of parental authority. As we move closer to the final chapters of this story, we will examine what happened to Suzane, Daniel, and Christian after their convictions, exploring their current status, their efforts at rehabilitation, and what the future might hold for those forever changed by this dark chapter in Brazilian history. As of 2024, nearly 36 years after the murders of Manfred and Marísia von Richthofen, the lives of Suzane, Daniel, and Christian Cravinhos have taken very different paths, shaped by the weight of their past actions, the passage of time, and the evolving nature of justice and public perception. Suzane von Richthofen, now 40 years old, was granted conditional release in 2022 after serving over 2 decades behind bars, marking a controversial turning point in her life and reigniting public debate about her potential for redemption and the fairness of her sentence. She is currently under house arrest, monitored electronically, and allowed to work remotely while continuing her studies, reportedly focusing on psychology and writing, though details about her daily life remain scarce due to her preference for privacy. While there have been rumors that Suzane is working on a memoir detailing her experiences, no official publication has been confirmed, and she has largely avoided giving interviews or engaging with the media since her release. Daniel Cravinhos, now 42, was released from prison in 2023 after serving over 20 years for his role in the murders. Unlike Suzane, he has made brief appearances in the press, expressing remorse for his actions and stating that he hopes to live a quiet life away from the spotlight. According to sources close to him, Daniel has sought therapy to deal with the psychological trauma of the crime and has expressed a desire to help prevent youth violence through community outreach programs, though he has not officially launched any initiatives. Christian Cravinhos, now 39, completed his sentence several years ago and has remained largely out of the public eye, choosing to rebuild his life quietly without drawing attention to his past. He has reportedly distanced himself from both Suzane and Daniel, citing emotional exhaustion and the need to separate from the legacy of the crime that defined much of his life. None of the three have issued formal public apologies to the extended Richthofen family or taken steps toward reconciliation, a fact that continues to draw criticism from victims' rights advocates and members of the public who believe accountability should include personal amends. Suzane's release in particular has been met with widespread outrage on social media, with many users condemning what they see as an unjust leniency towards someone responsible for orchestrating the deaths of 2 innocent people. Supporters of her conditional freedom, however, argue that she has served her time, demonstrated behavioral improvements, and deserves the chance to reintegrate into society like any other ex-convict. The case remains a polarizing topic in Brazil, with opinions divided along lines of justice philosophy. Some believe in the concept of rehabilitation and second chances, while others maintain that certain crimes are so severe that they warrant lifelong consequences. Meanwhile, the legacy of Manfred and Marísia continues to live on through the memories of those who knew them, and through the countless discussions that still take place about their untimely deaths and the devastating ripple effects of the crime. Whether Suzane, Daniel, and Christian can ever truly escape the shadow of their past remains uncertain. But one thing is clear: the Richthofen case will continue to be studied, debated, and remembered for generations to come. The Richthofen case stands as one of the most disturbing and thought-provoking true crime stories in Brazilian history, not just because of the brutality of the murders, but because of the psychological and moral complexities that surround it. It is a story that forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about human behavior, the fragility of family relationships, and the power of manipulation in shaping the decisions of young minds. The murders of Manfred and Marísia von Richthofen serve as a tragic reminder that even within the walls of a seemingly stable and loving home, darkness can grow unnoticed, nurtured by resentment, unchecked emotions, and the intoxicating allure of forbidden love. Suzane's calculated planning, Daniel's willingness to act on her behalf, and Christian's involvement out of fear and loyalty all point to a chilling reality. Sometimes, the most dangerous threats come not from strangers, but from those closest to us. This case also highlights the importance of open communication, emotional support, and mental health awareness within families, showing how a lack of understanding and connection can push individuals toward unthinkable actions. The judicial process, though delayed and imperfect, ultimately delivered a verdict that reflected the severity of the crime, but it also opened up broader conversations about how society treats young offenders and whether the legal system is equipped to handle such morally ambiguous cases. The lasting impact of the Richthofen case on Brazilian culture cannot be overstated, from films and documentaries to books and podcasts. The story continues to captivate new generations, ensuring that the lessons learned from this tragedy are not forgotten. Whether viewed as a cautionary tale, a psychological study, or a legal milestone, the Richthofen case offers valuable insights into the intersection of crime, justice, and human emotion. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to reflect on its deeper meanings, the dangers of unchecked ambition, the consequences of manipulation, and the importance of empathy in understanding even the darkest aspects of human nature. Consider sharing this video with others who are interested in true crime, psychology, or social justice. Your engagement helps spread awareness and encourages meaningful discussion around these important topics. Don't forget to like this video if you enjoyed the depth and detail of the narration. It helps support the channel and enables us to produce more high-quality content like this. And if you haven't already, subscribe to our channel for exclusive access to more gripping, well-researched, and emotionally powerful stories from around the world. Because every crime has a story worth telling. Thank you for watching. Stay informed, stay reflective, and remember, the past may be history, but it always has something to teach us. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep exploring the hidden layers of the stories that shape our world.